Hi, and welcome to this City and Guilds recording about the technical qualifications, specifically relating to land-based technicals. In this presentation, we're going to give you some advice and guidance on both the synoptic assessment and the theory exam. My name is Sarah Cox, and I am the technical advisor for land here at City and Guilds, and I'm joined by John Kerrigan, who is the principal moderator for animal management.
Perfect, thanks, Sarah. Yeah, so we're just going to go through the presentation. If then you've got any questions, we're going to try and create a live session then for people to bring back any questions that they've got. Obviously, my focus will be animal management, so you'll find that a lot of the slide is geared towards animal management, but it pretty much relates to all land. So we'll go through. So the first thing really about the technicals is that preparation of the learner is absolutely key to success with the technicals. We need to prepare them properly for both the synoptic exam and the synoptic assignment. Okay, and without that preparation, they're in that exam on their own, they're in that synoptic on their own. So if they don't prepare properly, then they're not going to succeed. So we're going to look at formative assessment. Then we're going to talk about some exams. We're going to look at key terms within those exams. Have a walk through synoptic assignments. Talk about common mistakes that we're seeing. I've been principal moderator now for 6 years, 5-6 years, and I'll talk about the common mistakes that we see year on year, to be honest. Talk about synoptic adaptations for this year with 21-22 and under the COVID guidelines, and then answer some questions hopefully. Okay, so first of all, knowledge is power. So under yours, you need to know your synoptic and your qualification. Certainly a lot of the questions I get from new staff is purely because they don't recognize the requirement for them to understand in detail that qualification. So really break it down. You need to know what the candidates are going to be tested on. It tells you that in the qualification handbooks, and that then allows you to focus their attention to the correct areas. That's not saying you teach to the assessment. Please don't misunderstand that. You need to teach the whole of the specification, but it does allow you to focus on particular areas as well. Share knowledge with your candidates. Okay, it's not a massive secret. They need to understand what an assignment brief is going to look like. So you can use last year's brief to show them what a brief might look like. Definitely share the assessment objectives with them. Get them used to understanding the difference between AO2 and AO1. As I say, it's not a secret. And carry out multiple formative assessments to ensure readiness. This is an endpoint assessment. Okay, we Sitting Guilds expect you to put candidates in for assessment when they are ready. The only way you know if they're ready is by doing that formative assessment. So what is formative assessment? It's normally ongoing and informal to check progress. It's definitely paramount in everything throughout the technical qualification. And as I said before, Sitting Guilds advocate preparing candidates using a range of formative assessments. It's not unitized assessment like you may historically have been used to with other QCF qualifications. This is a synoptic assignment, and by that we mean they will cover several units within that assessment. So we can't just do unitized assessment. And it's imperative that candidates are assessed to ensure readiness for that mandatory external assessment. Okay, so the aim of formative assessment is to determine if learners are making progress towards the target. We should avoid using terms such as pass or fail, because it's formative assessment. You can't guarantee where the pass or fail mark's going to be, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later on. So again, try and avoid using terms and instead use terms such as not meeting target or meeting target or exceeding target of where you expect that learner to be at that point in the year. Alternatively, use previous year's benchmark, but do advise candidates that this is subject to change. The benchmarks are not fixed. They're like GCSEs, they're movable, depending on the awarding process will depend whether the benchmarks change or not. And they're designed to aid development. And, you know, we want learners to buy into that formative assessment and recognise the worth of it, that it does tell them exactly how they're progressing towards their target. If you use negative results or negative terms such as fail, or you could end up demoralising your candidates. Okay. So formative assessment should not only be carried out at unit level, as I mentioned before, but integrated work to encourage students to think more synoptically. There's no point in training them for a unitized assessment and then sitting them in an exam where they've then got to pull in information from all these units, for example, when they're tackling the extended response question, or when they're doing that synoptic assignment to then start pulling this information together. You need to start training them to think synoptically. Okay. You need to IQA formative assessment to ensure they're working towards the target at the correct pace, but also at the correct level. Okay, so that's another reason for that formative assessment and internal quality assurance of it. Okay, moving on to exams. For exam preparation, candidates were often not fully prepared, demonstrating a lack of knowledge and understanding. Okay, so these are the common faults that we're finding. So this is ill-prepared candidates not knowing or not understanding the question. Candidates being taught incorrectly. Now, you might find this a bit bizarre, but occasionally we find that there's a lack of updated skills or teaching to match the technical qualification content. So tutors must ensure that they have updated skills and teaching to match that content. Okay, so if the content's talking about the Animal Welfare Act, students should be talking about the 5 needs, not the 5 freedoms. Okay, the freedoms are not part of the Animal Welfare Act. At level 3, the integrated question or the extended response question is worth up to 12 marks, depending on the qualification. So my advice to candidates would be complete that first. Spend your time on a question that's worth 12 marks rather than going through spending your time on questions that are worth 1 and 2 marks and then realizing that you run out of time at the end. We do see extended response questions that literally just the answers that the candidates have wrote literally just stop. So clearly to us, they have run out of time for that exam. Okay. As far as completing the exams, then occasionally we get handwriting too poor to be able to award marks. If I can't read it, I cannot agree the mark. Okay, so if the candidate's handwriting is that poor, then they should be word processing it. Okay, you can ask sitting guilds for them to process a paper, word process a paper exam. That's not an issue, or they can do it using Evolve. Not answering the full question. So good practice is to underline each section as they go through the question and ensure that each section is then answered. Okay, so pick out the key, get them used to picking out those key command verbs of what they should be doing, picking out the key elements of what they should be answering within that question, get them underlined, and then make sure that they go back and visit each underlined section. Candidates not understanding marks awarded for each question. So again, if 3 marks are offered, then generally 3 separate points need to be made. Okay, they need to look at the marks, and if it's, for example, if it says describe 2 things and for a 6-mark question, then they need to understand that they will get 3 marks for each element that they have to describe. They wouldn't get 6 marks for answering one element really, really well, and no marks for answering another element, if that makes sense. Further on for completion, candidates not following instructions. So where we say describe 3 points, only 3 points are required. So if a candidate describes 5 points, they're still only going to get marks for 3 of them. So tell them not to waste the time by giving more than is required. Okay, their focus should be on making sure that what they do provide is correct, rather than providing more than is asked for. Again, candidates not following instructions, so state 3 points and describe 2 factors for each. Giving 6 marks means only 2 marks will be awarded for each point, and then the points will be awarded for 2 factors for each of those points. Okay, so they need to make sure that where it's split like that, that for each factor, so the factor would be worth 1 point, each point would be worth a mark, and then describing 2 factors would be worth 2 marks. Okay. Where there are multiple responses for an answer, candidates need to avoid repetition. For example, provide food as it is a need, and then provide water as it is a need. Their explanation there, although they're giving 2 initial different points, if you will, of provide food and then provide water, the reason behind that is exactly the same. So they would not necessarily gain marks for giving the same explanation. Okay, they need to try and think of a different reason. For the integrated question, okay, normally worth 12 points. As I said, it's not simply a case of listing 12 points and gaining 12 marks. Okay, it's not point based at all. What we're looking for is a depth of knowledge and understanding. Okay, and that's what we're wanting them to show in their answer, because how they answer that question and how much depth and understanding and breadth as well determines whereabouts in the banding they will be allocated by the marker. Examine the questions, cover all the areas, link topics from across the qualification, consider the units that are involved in that exam and the learning outcomes. Okay, and then that's what we're trying to get learners to pull together. So ensure that learners are fully aware which units are assessed in that exam and which learning outcomes from those units are assessed in that exam. All that information is in the unit specification. So for the grade boundaries, so I mentioned this briefly earlier on, the grade boundaries will only be decided at awarding, which is after the event. Okay, the exam will be discussed, and if any questions were misleading or unclear, or if the levels of difficulty were different, then boundaries could at that point be potentially altered. Okay, and just to give you an example, it does happen. So I know this is going back a few years as an example, but in April 2017, the pass mark for 031 assessment was 26 marks and the distinction was 42 marks. And in June, for the same assessment of that year, the pass mark was 24 marks and the distinction was 41. So you can see that there is a bit of a range in there, and the reason for that would have been discussed at awarding at the time and approved by City and Guilds. So you need to just be aware that when you're saying to a student, you know, aiming for a pass, be very aware of where the boundaries are for that. And what I would say is aim for them to be, you know, I would say a strong pass would be around sort of 28, 29, 30 marks. And realistically, if a candidate aims for that, then they should be nice and safe. Okay. Obviously, we want them to aim higher, but that's the minimum they should be aiming for. For your exam dates, please refer to the exam timetable. So that's on the City and Guilds website. There are some changes that City and Guilds have come forward with. So for the 539 level 3 animal management exam, that has changed from morning to afternoon. And for the 508 level 3 equine management exam, that has changed from morning to afternoon. And that's because they clashed with some GCSEs and feedback from centres asked for that change. Okay. And again, please make sure that you're reading all of the City and Guilds guidance. Okay, moving on to key terms. So some of the key terms that we're going to come across within the exam. So terminology that generally indicates an AO1 question. is, for example, list, state, outline, define, give, and they are normally 1 mark for each correct response. So if it's list 3 items, it would be worth 3 marks. Okay, so make sure that candidates are fully aware that if it's asking them to list, that they don't then go on describing why or justifying. Okay, it is simply looking at those key terms. For AO2 questions, then we might have explain, compare, describe, discuss, evaluate, and they're normally more than 1 mark awarded for each correct response, and there may be several responses with an answer. So it could be for a 6-mark question, explain 2 reasons why, and then going on to the question. Okay, so you would then get 3 marks for each reason. So that means you need to give 3 components to that response, if that makes sense. Okay. Other terms, we see this a lot where we ask for a named example. So this is for the candidate to be specific in their response, and they don't give us a named example. So you might have list equipment required for a named task, and they don't name the task, or discuss the housing requirements for a named species, and then they don't name the species. So again, candidates will lose marks because they're not naming the species, and therefore we can't be confident that their understanding is being shown over that species requirement. When we ask candidates to compare, they've got to cover both sides of the argument. So again, if they're comparing wild to domestic species, if they just talk about what wild animals would do and then go domestic species won't, they won't get the marks. They have to cover both examples. Okay. If they're evaluating, they've got to discuss both sides of the argument and give positives and negatives. Okay, so an evaluation means talk about the pros and cons, the positives and negatives. So evaluate the effectiveness. They need to talk about how it is effective and where there's elements where it's not effective. Moving on to the synoptic assignment. Sorry, before I do, Sarah, have you anything to add around exams or anything at that point?
Oh, no, I don't think so. I think you've covered everything. I think it just goes back to what you said right at the start about preparation and preparing your candidates for the kind of questions that they're going to get within the exam, and they know what those command verbs are and know what's expected of them.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, so moving on to the synoptic assignment. Really important here, read all of the assignment brief, including the tutor guidance. City and Guilds get so many questions that are actually answered in the tutor guidance about what you can and can't do as part of the assessment. So make sure you fully read the tutor guidance and the assignment brief. Okay, it does change year on year, so do make sure you check each year's. Some of the finer details explained in that brief, either for the candidate or it may be in the tutor guidance for the assessor. As I said, most of the queries can be answered rather than contacting Technicals Quality or Sarah. And all synoptics go through a centre consultation from September to the end of October. That is the time for you to utilise to raise any points of clarification from City and Guilds. Okay, the synoptics are released in September. You've got till the end of October to read them and understand them and ask any questions regarding them, because after October they then get fed through to the principal moderator who sits with City and Guilds and tries to clear up any of those points of clarification. Do note that generally the tasks don't change that much, but there might be some extra clarity around the tasks. And then on the 1st of December, or that's the aim date anyway, the synoptics then get released, and that's the final version being released. Okay. When it comes to marking the synoptics, move totally away from pass, merit and distinction. Okay, BAM 1 is not necessarily a pass. If you added up all the marks in band 1, you're generally getting to around 20, 21 marks, which, as I said before, is most likely not a pass. Read the descriptors for the bands and then determine how the assignment fits into that band. Okay, so think about the banding, look at the key verbs that are in that banding, and then place it within that band, and then decide whereabouts in the band it sits, whether it's top, middle, or bottom. The feedback on the assignment, we still see occasionally, it is getting less and less each year, but we still see it, where feedback is aimed at the candidate on how to improve. And I know this has been drummed into centres for years, but the feedback on a synoptic assignment should be aimed at the moderator rather than the candidate. Okay, the candidate's not going to get the work back. They're not going to be able to make any changes or anything like that. The feedback should be there for the moderator, not for the candidate. Okay, and it should be guiding the moderator as to how the evidence meets the assessment's objectives. Okay, sometimes we do see incorrectly signposted. So, for example, a candidate will list the 5 needs from the Animal Welfare Act, and the tutor will highlight it and say strong AO2 understanding. Listing the 5 needs is not demonstrating understanding. That is showing higher levels of recall. Okay, so please make sure that you signpost correctly on that. Looking at some of the errors then that result in moderators coming back to centres. So what's normally referred back, if there's errors in calculating total scores of CRFs or exams, it's not hard, it's simple maths, please add up correctly, just double check. Errors in the input of the score on the moderation portal. So for example, we see that the CRF states a score of 42, and then on the moderation portal, there's an uploaded score of 45. Again, it's just sloppy data management. Please just check on that, you know, double check the same as you would if it was an EQA coming. Errors in input of unitized examination grade onto the moderation portal. So for example, they've uploaded a merit and the evidence shows that it's a pass, and evidence missing the candidate declaration of authenticity. Sorry, evidence missing, for example, a candidate declaration of authenticity. Okay, City and Guilds are very, very clear about what you must submit as far as paperwork is concerned. So if any of that paperwork is missing, moderators will send it straight back to centre, asking you to upload all of the evidence. What happens then if a candidate fails the synoptic assignment? Okay, if they don't achieve a minimum pass, they will be given the opportunity of a resit the following year. Okay, with the following year's synoptic assignment. So it will be a different assignment. Okay, for the synoptic, there is no in-year reassessment opportunity. Okay, there is for the exam, there's a March sitting and a June sitting, but for the synoptic assignment, there is no in-year reassessment opportunity. There has been the last couple of years due to COVID an autumn series, but that will not always be the case moving forward. Okay. Synoptic assessment, common areas of weakness then, candidates failing to identify the breadth and depth of the qualification and how that relates to the stated scenario, and then linking that scenario to the individual tasks. So the brief gives them the overall scenario. The tasks are then explaining what they need to do. And what we're aiming for is the candidate to be able to link what they've done in the task to the original scenario. Okay, and that could gain them some extra marks in, you know, in the fact that they've been able to link that across. Candidates failing to articulate during practical assessments. So some practical assessments state that they must give a verbal commentary, others don't. So if it doesn't, the candidate doesn't have to give a running commentary during the assessment. Okay, if that's what the task states. If they don't, you need to somehow determine that candidate's understanding. So if they're not able to articulate their understanding at the end of the assessment, you then need to ask questions that do not lead to check that understanding. So for example, if you've watched, and again, I'm going to stick with animal just because it's my background, but if you've watched a candidate cleaning out an animal accommodation, and you saw that they had put some wood shavings in as substrate after they'd cleaned it out, you could say to the candidate, I noticed you putting in that substrate. Why did you choose that substrate? Okay, so then the candidate can say, well, I chose wood shavings because of its absorbing properties, it's cheap, it's easily available, it's comfortable for the animal. You know, they're able to then articulate. What we don't want to do is say to a candidate that you observe them putting in shavings, you don't want to say to them, why did you choose shavings over another bedding material, okay, or substrate material? Because they may not have known that they were actually working with shavings. I know it sounds ridiculous, but they may not have known the correct term for it. So you don't want to give them anything that they haven't given you. So if they've said it was their shavings already, you can then say, why did you choose shavings? Okay, hopefully that clarifies a little bit on that. Candidates failing to draw information from other topics to demonstrate AO4, bringing it all together. So the way I like to explain this to students is, tell me what I've not asked for. So if you're doing a health check, the things I've not asked for, you can link into there. So you might link into the health check and the effects on health, the animal's behavior. You might link in the animal's nutrition. You might link in the animal accommodation. Those sort of things can all be linked in. So when they're bringing it all together, what we're looking for is them linking those topics and drawing them all in to answer your response. Candidates failing to check after themselves to ensure AO5 attention to detail is achieved. Okay. Attention to detail is not spelling and grammar, but it is checking after themselves, making sure they've done it right, covering all elements of the task that were asked for them. Okay, so if they've been asked to create a plan and then justify their plan, if they've just created it and not justified it, their attention to detail is lacking. Okay, so it's making sure that they're doing everything they're meant to have done, and then checking after themselves, and you know, that fine attention to detail, that polished performance is what we're looking for. Another common area of weakness is assessors failing to capture the evidence. I have seen a PO form that just said underperformed on it. It was absolutely horrendous. Okay, so we need to make sure that tutors are capturing that rich evidence, and we don't want a running commentary of what they've done. Okay, we want the rich evidence that tells you which part of the banding you are putting them in and which assessment objective you're linking it to. Okay, and assessors failing to describe the evidence. Okay, so like I say, we will get running commentaries, but that doesn't describe the evidence. It doesn't tell me how well. You might tell me that the candidate approached the animal, picked the animal up, put it into a basket, then clean the accommodation out, then put all the materials back in, and then put the animal back in. At no point have we said how well the candidate's done that, and that's what we're looking for within that describing evidence. So it's not only snippets of what was the rich evidence, but also how well they did that evidence. Okay, so for 2022, the Synoptic Window, so as you know, the assessment window opened on the 4th of January. Some people are starting to assess already. The deadline for the Synoptic Window for both level 2 and level 3 is the 20th of May, 2022. It is subject to change, obviously, if the dreaded C happens. I'm not going to mention it because I'm keeping upbeat. But we know that we have had issues over the last couple of years, but the plan is this year that unless we're told different, things will go ahead as normal. And let's hope for that. Okay, so things to consider. Are you staggering the release of the Synoptic assignment to various groups or learners in a cohort? If you are, you need to make sure that candidates have been aware that providing or receiving prior knowledge would be treated as malpractice and could result in invalidation of results. Okay, so they could end up with a 0 mark for that Synoptic. All right. We recognise there is a need for some areas to, or some centres to do this because they have much bigger cohorts. Certainly in animal, we see some really large cohorts. You know, so where you've got 200 learners completing a Synoptic, you do need to spread it out, and we get that. Is there a signed declaration form confirming no prior knowledge, and how will assessors authenticate individual candidate work? Okay, so it's down to you to authenticate that work. I know a lot of centres use various programs such as Turnitin, and that's a way of saying, yes, we've authenticated that this is the candidate's own work. Okay, and there needs to be a signed declaration form stating that it is their own work. For estate skills or machinery tasks within the land synoptic assignments, these tasks can be collected, the evidence for these tasks, should I say, can be collected at any time throughout the academic year as per the guidance for assessment. Okay. I've been asked, should they be given the assignment brief when they're given the task? The answer is no, they shouldn't. Okay. Because it's only permitted where the task does not link directly to other tasks within the assignment. Okay, so that brief should still be given at the start of their synoptic window. If this is being done throughout the year, then they shouldn't be given the brief at that time. But the evidence for that task then should be submitted along with the rest of the synoptic assignment evidence and the marks. Okay. So the PO form should comment on the evidence from the estate skills or machinery task along with any other practical elements to that synoptic. Okay, so thinking of this year, are there any permitted adaptations being used? The answer is yes, there are. Staggered release to cohorts, as I've already discussed. Research tasks don't need to be supervised this year. Okay, so do say to learners that they can complete those research tasks separately. Okay, however, it is descriptive about how much research they produce. Report tasks, they need to be supervised, but you can carry out that supervision remotely. Okay, so learners can do the written work remotely, but you do need to supervise them. Okay, again, you know, think about how you are ensuring that learners are not breaking the conditions of assessment. Okay, I've had staff come to me and ask, well, what if I can't see everyone on Teams? If you can't see them, then you're not supervising them. Okay, so make sure that you're keeping the conditions of assessment with that. Practical tasks can be completed remotely if they're live. Okay, so they would have to carry out the practical task and stream it somehow live to you so that you could see what's going on. Okay. The merging of tasks is permissible. So where a task is carried out for an optional unit that provides evidence that could be considered for a synoptic task or vice versa. Okay. There's not a lot of this goes on, so just be very, very careful that you are definitely meeting either the task requirements of the synoptic or that you are definitely meeting the criteria for the optional unit. Okay, so be very, very careful about how you do that. Any additional permitted adaptations will be available within the individual assignment themselves, so do check those, like I mentioned before. And there's expanded detail there under the adaptations for technical qualifications. Okay, so hopefully that's given you a bit of an idea about the sort of fundamentals, if you will. If you do have specific questions, we're going to do 2 follow-up Q&A sessions available on the following dates. We've tried splitting these just to make it more accessible for staff. And we understand the current demands for teaching. So we've done a bit of a twilight session and an early morning session. So Friday, the 18th of February from 8 till 9:30 will be a live Q&A. And then Friday, the 18th of February, later on that day at 3:30 till 5. Okay. And the links are on there. If you've got any queries about the sessions at all, then please contact Sarah Cox. The email's there in front of you. And yeah, good luck. And hopefully I'll speak to some of you on the 18th of February. Sarah, have you anything to add on there?
No, that's fab. Thank you, John, so much. It's really good to hear it from a principal moderator's perspective and see a slightly different side of things to what we see. So just to let you know that we also have 2 webinars coming up in the next couple of weeks on the 7th and 14th of February, which are generic webinars, one on preparing your candidates for the exam, and one on synoptic marking of PO forms and CRFs, so a bit more guidance on the type of evidence to capture and good practice for writing up feedback. So those links will also be included in the comms that this has come out with. So if you want to register for one of those GoToWebinars, then they'll be really worthwhile. And also, if you register for those, and this is true of any of our City and Guilds webinars, if you register and can't actually attend, you will get the recording from the webinar emailed to you a couple of days after the webinar. So it's always worth registering, even if you know you can't attend, so that you can get the recording. Okay, so thank you for listening. Hope to see some of you for our Q&A sessions on the 18th of February. In the meantime, if you've got any queries, you can drop me an email. My email's on the slide there, and we'll get back to you as soon as I can. Okay.
Thanks very much.